CW, how are you?
Beautiful, Rita Wild. Here we are again with a cool episode of Rock and Roll Confessional.
Let's go.
Let's go. This episode with Grammy Award winners Mark Linett and Alan Boyd, who are part of the team that are releasing the new Beach Boys remaster compilation, The Sounds of Summer, the very best of the Beach Boys.
It features 80 remastered tracks and is available on either a 3 CD package or a 6 vinyl album package. Mark and Alan have been working with the Beach Boys archives for over 30 years, and they come to us with some great stories about the new box set and working with the band.
So here we go with our interview with Mark Linett and Alan Boyd.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Rock and Roll Confessional. We have Alan Boyd with us and also Mark Linett. And you two were basically responsible for a lot of this remastering of this upcoming release, Sounds of Summer, which just looks fantastic. We've only been able to hear one of the songs, and it's just like we have so many questions about that. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you got involved with the Beach Boys?
Oh, go for it, Mark.
I've been doing it the longest, so maybe I should get first. Yeah, I started working with Brian on his first solo album in 1987, just as a result of a simple phone call that had me subbing for a session, and I went on to do that for a year. And at the same time, while we were working on that, Capitol decided to put Pet Sounds out on the brand new hot medium of CD. And so I was handed that job, and that led to doing the Capitol catalog as the twofers, and then the Good Vibrations box and the Pet Sounds box. And and then several other albums with Brian, starting with the Live at the Roxy and Pet Sounds Live, and most significantly, I suppose, the completion of Smile and the premiere performances in London, and then another video performance in California. Alan came on the scene in 2000. I'll let him tell his story, but we've been doing this ever since, and that includes the first go round of Sounds of Summer in I guess it was 2003, which typical of the Beach Boys, the expectations at the time from the label were that it might sell about 500,000 units. And of course it went on, I think so far we're at about 4.5 million, something like that.
I got involved with them in kind of a strange way, in that some songs I had recorded for like Beach Boys fan conventions in the style of the group got noticed by people involved in the band, and they kind of tracked me down and sought me out. And at the time, I was a filmmaker and editor, and I ended up getting drafted to make a film about the Beach Boys' experience in Nashville when they did a sort of a country thing, with Willie Nelson and Tammy Wynette and all these people. And that led to me directing a feature-length documentary on the group, and I ended up making a bunch of films about the boys at that time. And I got a really good working knowledge of the archive. And Mark and I ended up doing a project called Hawthorne together, which I'm really proud of. I think it's a really kind of a cool compilation. It was almost like an audio documentary.
Go find it.
Yeah. But along this time, what was happening was anytime the Beach Boys management got a request for something out of the vaults, they would refer to me. And in the end, I ended up suggesting that let's embark on a really serious archival management and preservation program. And their manager at the time, Elliot Lott, saw the value in this. And Mark and I just began this sort of long process of making high-res digital preservation masters of the tapes and cataloging everything. And this has led to us being able to do all sorts of archival projects because we found an enormous amount of really interesting and sometimes very surprising material, buried in those tapes. And it's an ongoing process. We're actually still working on it. We've got new archivists who've been brought in who are helping us, sort through all the film and the video and the stills and the audio. And, just the fact that the Beach Boys kept so much of their material has enabled all of these, really fascinating projects that we've been doing all these years.
And that's 60 years of material.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we still haven't archived it all. We've done, I don't know, maybe
Wow.
80, 90%. Most of what we haven't archived is some of the live material from the 70s and 80s and 90s. And the wonderful thing about it is, having done this, it makes projects, well, all these projects, but especially ones like Smile and the Feel Flows box, it makes it possible for us to do the research and put these together without having to stop and pull 100 tapes and do the transfers. And, it saves an enormous amount of time, because, normally I have more or less instant access to almost anything in the archives. And Alan brings up a good point. The Beach Boys are somewhat unique, especially for a 60s group, the group that started in the 60s, in that they have so much of their recordings, and not just the final multi-track or the album masters. Starting with Shutdown Volume 2, we have virtually all the session masters. There are a few exceptions here and there, and some notable ones. We have all their session outtakes, which makes a project like the Pet Sounds box possible. Most groups wouldn't have that access, because they would have turned their material into the label. And no disrespect to the label, the labels would only have kept the final multi-track, which in the 60s would have been a dub down of a dub down, perhaps 4 or 5 dub downs. And of course, the final release master. I mean, not only was pop music, rock music in particular, thought of as being, completely disposable, and, after its first go round, largely worthless. If labels had just routinely said, well, let's keep everything, they'd have a vault now the size of Rhode Island. I remember when I was working at Warner recording studios in the 80s, we had in the back warehouse, we had this huge mountain of tape that had, come into the label and had been deemed to be discarded. And I remember going through it and, finding all kinds of people's masters that had mistakenly been tossed in that pile and sending them back to the library. So we and the world are fortunate that that all this material got saved, especially, for a group that was so prolific, and also where the sessions are so interesting to listen to, especially the era of Pet Sounds and Smile and so forth. To hear the material evolve, over a long session to what's finally used for the release is very revelatory, and it's so fortunate, especially an album like Pet Sounds, that we had that. And that in that case, I mean, except for what we're missing the session for Don't Talk. We just have the second generation of that, and there are a few things that were recorded over on the final multi-track, and Brian went back and used pieces of an earlier mix, like Mike and the Bridge of Wouldn't It Be Nice. But we have well in excess of 90% of everything that was recorded for that album.
Wow, that's just amazing. Especially because the place that you were talking about at Warner Brothers, that's a place that caught on fire, right?
No,
that was Universal.
That's Universal,
Oh,
and that's much later, and nothing to do with the Beach Boys catalog.
Yeah.
There's some question about whose tapes were destroyed, because of course there's lawsuits, and nobody wants to
surprise
to own up to that. Lawsuits, music. You're kidding me.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Well, and I mean, the industry, especially in California, has a long history of fires destroying, valuable things, but it also has a long history. Somebody coming along and saying, "Oh, all that stuff we've been storing, that's not worth anything." So, we need to put the
torch it.
Just take it to the dump. We need to store the Sparklets bottles there. Take all those, Warner Brothers, take all those animation cells.
It is a long story. I'm also involved in film preservation, and I've actually got working with the UCLA Archives and the Mary Pickford Foundation. I've got a couple of thousand reels of nitrate film as part of my own collection, and the number of fires and things and whole studio outputs destroyed over the years, because that stuff is so flammable. It's an ongoing, it's an ongoing race,
before the air destroys everything.
Yeah. Well, and in the music business, recording studios routinely, when they closed, usually would try to contact, the acts or the labels. And I've heard so many stories of the guy, nobody came around. So, into the dumpster it went. I mean, big, famous studios. We're fortunate. One thing that happened around 70, because it's not like anybody thought at the time, oh, we've got to preserve all this. They just left it, they left it where they finished it, which was mostly 3 or 4 studios in California. And real estate, we're still at the point where most of the major studios from that era, save 1 or 2, are still in business. So in 1978, when the Beach Boys decided they did want to find all their tapes, it was a relatively easy process to go to Western and Sunset and Gold Star and get all that stuff back. It's unfortunate that for whatever reason the guy doing it didn't know about the Beach Boys had recorded at CBS studios out here, and there were some tapes there which we're pretty sure got destroyed along with everything else in their what had been left behind around 1979, including, unfortunately, the 8-track final master for Good Vibrations. That's probably the biggest the biggest loss in our archives. And on the other hand, we still occasionally find tapes that have been hiding either in a studio or in somebody's home for all these years. We've gotten tapes back that were in Carl Wilson's closet. Wow. One of which is on the box set. There was another fellow whose brother seemed to have gotten a hold of a bunch of reels from the Shutdown Volume 2 album and brought those to us about 15 years ago.
You ever ask him where it came from?
Yeah, he said it was basically a garage sale, and there were a bunch of tapes. And I think he said that he bought those because they had the most leaders in them, so he figured they had the most songs. And that may well be where some of the early stuff that we're missing, like we don't have any recordings for Beach Radio School, for example, and maybe where those ended up. It's just a guess, but we have pictures of the family home in Hawthorne. You may have even seen them. And in the kitchen, above the kitchen cabinets, you can see a whole bunch of tapes, and they're 1/2-inch tapes. So they would have been, studio masters. And, my guess is that when they got rid of the house, either they gave them away or put them out at the curb or, whatever. They just, there wasn't any reason, to keep them, to think that way. Until the mid 80s, record labels had no thought that past perhaps a greatest hits reissue or something, that they certainly didn't think that a whole bunch of outtakes would ever have any value in the marketplace, that anybody in the general public would want to hear them. So the attitude was very much that it was all worthless and disposable. And there are numerous stories of stuff just being disposed of randomly. On the other hand, some stuff gets left behind. 10 years ago or so, somebody told me that there's a studio out here called Valentine, where the Beach Boys recorded a good bit in 68 and a little bit of 69, some of the 2020 album. And, of course, years ago, we went around to every studio that still existed looking for material that, had slipped through the group's fingers, and including that. And they said, no, we don't have anything. Well, the studio subsequently closed when the owner died, and was basically just mothballed. They locked the door and left it there. And about 10 years ago, somebody called me up who knew that I worked with the group and said that he'd been in there and had seen the tape library, and there was a tape that said Beach Boys. So I got a hold of the owners, which were the children of the engineer / owner, but they didn't want to give us the tape.
Here comes the long part.
Well, it's not that long. I mean, I sort of understand. I mean, they weren't studio people, and their attitude was, well, it's in our dad's studio, so
it's ours.
It must be ours. And they weren't entirely wrong, of course. I mean, anyway. But anyhow, and it wasn't until somebody leased the place, took it over, and started using it again, and he convinced them they should return it to us. They were very nice about it. It was just, anyway, it took me 8 years to get that tape. And it turned out to be 3 different overdub masters of the song All I Want to Do from the 2020 album, one of which is on, I think, disc 3 of The New Sounds of Summer.
Yeah, that was the happy ending I was going to add. It's on the new set.
And I was going to ask about the Smile box set that you guys put together and won a Grammy for. Am I correct in assuming that was Brian Wilson's first Grammy also? Or had he won before?
I believe he got a Grammy for one of the songs on Brian Wilson Presents Smile in 2004. Is that right, Mark?
No, I don't think so. No. I think that's the only solo Grammy. I think the Beach Boys got sort of an honorary Grammy.
Yeah, they got that in like 2000, 2001.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it.
I mean, you think of works, like Pet Sounds, and just how that influenced, mainly, a lot of people, but the Beatles. I mean, Paul McCartney says that was, Sgt. Pepper was our response to Pet Sounds. And just the stuff that was going on in the studio, the stuff that was going on in Brian's brain at that time. Can you expound on that and just how creative it was?
I think Good Vibrations lost a Grammy to
Winchester Cathedral.
Oh my God. Are you kidding me? Oh my God.
The list of these things is, it's kind of endless. I mean, all the way to Pet Sounds was nominated. Pet Sound Sessions was nominated for Best Historical and lost to the Hank Williams box. But I mean, I don't even know what to say about something like that, because that's a category where apples and oranges doesn't even begin to cover it. So I mean, that they didn't get the Grammys they deserve. So, and neither did the Beatles, by the way.
That's true.
I mean, the Grammys.
Grammys are still doing it.
Yeah,
they are still managed. Yes, exactly. A lot. Yeah. Brian has one for Fire. Yes, and I remember going to and I was nominated for Best Engineered, and I remember going to they have a party, or in those days they had a party the night before the ceremony, and I remember running into the guy who had produced the Ray Charles box that year, which came on the heels of the Jamie Foxx Ray Charles movie, and of course the Penta Ultimate PR stunt, which is Ray had died that year. And the guy said, look, I've heard Brian Wilson Smile, it's great, it's fantastic, but we're going to win every category we're nominated in. And he was absolutely right. The only category that Brian Wilson Presents Smile won in was a category that Ray Charles wasn't nominated in, best instrumental or whatever it was. So anyway, we got back to, yes, the Smile box was Brian's second solo Grammy.
And your first, both of you?
It was my second, actually.
Your second. And how about you, Alan? Did you got a Grammy too?
I got nominated for the Endless Harmony film. So it was second nomination, first win.
Oh, very good. Excellent.
Mine would have been the third or fourth nomination. I forget.
Well, this box set is, it's got everything on it because, as you mentioned, the previous one came out 2003. Mm-hmm. The first thing that you put together, and this has 80 tracks, 24 which have never been I guess, remastered before and redone?
They've all been remastered. There's actually 26 updated or new mixes, if you will. The first version, we still had a lot of mono mixes. Some things we had already done first time stereo. You understand that while the early albums were quickly mixed in stereo, which when there was 3-track generally meant track, vocal, or something weird like that. So as Alan always tells it, if you hear one of those versions in the supermarket, the band is in the meat section and over there.
I'm just Don't Worry Baby at the local Bonds, and I've got Brian above my head in the produce section, and the other Beach Boys are singing over somewhere by the dairy cow.
It's kind of nice, kind of like that. It's kind of like Atmos. Supermarket. There we go. Supermarket Atmos. They should. Once upon a time, they would have probably sold it that way. Starting with the Today album, when Brian took full control of the production, and also when they started doing more overdubbing, the next bunch of albums were only released in mono and rechanneled stereo, duophonic. So Today, Summer Days, Pet Sounds, Smiley Smile, and Wild Honey, right? That's and Party. Maybe I've forgotten one. Those were all only released in mono. So one of the things we've been doing for the last 20 years is when we have the material, and we haven't always, creating true stereo versions of these recordings. And in the last 4 or 5 years, AI technology has made it possible to extract instruments and vocals from a mono recording. So that's one thing we featured pretty heavily on this set is quite a few remixes that either there are a few that we only have mono, Surf and Safari, I Get Around, Help Me Rhonda, for example. So those are full extractions using the technology. And then there are a bunch of other ones where the band track that typically was recorded in mono, and using the same technology, we can extract the band into at least 3 tracks, bass, drums, and the instruments, meaning that we can now do a stereo mix where the band isn't all one place or the other. There's some spread.
Not in the meat section.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Put them right in the cereal.
Yeah. And there's a lot of this. I mean, the Pet Sounds way back in '93, we were doing this because the typical recording process by then was recording the backing track in 3-track, mixing that down to mono, either onto another 4-track, or 1 track of an 8-track, and then doing the vocals and mixing that down to mono. So the trick for all those recordings was to sync the original instrumental tracks to the vocals, and then have something, something we could spread out to do the mixes with. So we've been doing that to as much of the catalog, as possible over the years. I mean, remixing, all of the Wild Honey album and Party and all of those albums, and they continue to evolve. So we've tried to update them again for this package.
I have to say, one of the interesting things that Brian was moving ahead of his time very early, and that what he was hearing was kind of going beyond the available technology, and so he would still be adding tracks as he dubbed down to a final mono master. So there are layers of overdubs on songs like, Help Me Rhonda and Do You Want to Dance, and, some of those other, kind of big productions he was doing that don't exist in any discrete form. They only exist on the, on the final single. Because he was going down so many generations and adding so much material as he went along that he was almost kind of like running out of tracks. So we've got these, we've got some fascinating sessions where you hear the Beach Boys overdubbing, one more layer of vocals and a lead guitar part on top of what already sounds like a finished mixed single, just to make it that much richer and more, give it more oomph.
Yeah. Now going back into the studios in those days in the 60s, was it 4-track or was it 8-track?
It was 3-track to 4-track to 8-track. It was
Well, I give you the day. Yeah, I mean, four track comes in maybe very late in '65, certainly by '66. I mean, Pet Sounds, it depends on which studio. Gold Star didn't. Two songs were cut at Gold Star. Wouldn't it be nice? And I just wasn't made for these times. Gold Star was a little late going 4-track, so they were still 3-track in '66. So those two were cut to 3-track. At Western, where everything else were recorded, they had 4-track by then. Sloop John B is 3-track. Everything else that was done at Western in '66 is 4-track. But they're only using 3 tracks because the console was only 3 tracks. So the fourth track at the tracking date would wind up with a rough mono mix, and that's all they were listening to. The whole idea was simply to allow a little bit of control when the mono mix was made after the fact, rather than having to decide and lock it down on the spot, which they had done for years. But I don't know. It was probably Brian who decided this, because you see it both at all 3 studios. It's not like, Chuck Britz, who was the engineer, well, one of the engineers, not the only one at Western on Pet Sounds, decided that this is what they should do. It's that way everywhere. 8-track comes in, I think, around '68.
Well, we've got 8-track comes in at Columbia at 60.
Well, Columbia, yeah. I'm sorry, that's true. In LA, the only studio that had an 8-track in '65 actually was CBS, and for that reason, half of the Summer Days album was completed there, as was half of Pet Sounds, and we do have those 2 tapes, fortunately. But somehow over the ensuing years, and we have film of them recording, doing the vocals for Good Vibrations at CBS, and you can see the tape spinning, in the background. But that tape somehow got left behind, and who knows what else. I mean, there were certainly Smile vocal sessions done there as well. So there's probably, that's sort of the unanswered question. What may have been recorded and then, lost or recorded over or discarded. I mean, there's no way of knowing.
I originally remember hearing Good Vibrations and how good it sounded when I was a kid. And now I listen to the new version that just got released, which is kind of the first cut from this box set. And boy, it sounds almost like quad. It's like so rich and so deep, and hearing that theremin, which I'd never ever heard in that song before. But the mix on this is just brilliant, and I can't wait to hear so many of the others.
Thanks. Well, it's interesting that in some ways that mix is a result of 6 years of evolution. About 6 or 7 years ago, I assembled. We have all the basics recording sessions, instrumental sections for the record, and Brian, used various pieces, to create the record, which always just floored me. That I mean, I don't know which I'm more astonished at. That he did that, or understanding, why when he tried to do a whole album like that, Smile, it became, just too much, a monumental task. And as we sort of touched on, Brian was trying to make a record when the technology didn't support it. I mean, when we went to do,
in his head, yeah.
Well, or just to be able to experiment. I mean, because he recorded all these little sections and to try them in different orders. Well, in those days, it meant finding the right tape, and there was no random access, program to let you keep track of it all. Finding the piece you wanted, mixing it to 1/4-inch tape, taking the other piece you wanted, and joining all these pieces together, which wasn't particularly, easy to do in an artistic way. And then if you didn't like that, you had to do it all over again. When we went to do it, we not only had we had transferred everything years before, and we had a database that showed us where everything was, and we're now into computer recording, so we can do random access editing and can move stuff around. I mean, I say this all the time. I mean, the things when I started recording, some of the things like just flying in a background vocal. If you have a song and you record a background vocal, and you want to use it, which is typical now, you want to use the same set of backgrounds in all 3 choruses. Well, that it takes it takes minutes now. In the old days, you would have to copy those onto another machine and then manually put the other one machine and record, and line up the other machine and start it at a certain point and do this until it sounded right. I mean, these things take no time at all. So when we actually went to do the Smile sessions, we had all these advantages, and it was still a huge job.
One thing about Brian, what he was doing, particularly with Smile, and especially Heroes and Villains, was he was approaching it in a way, and I guess this is instinctively on his part, it was much more like making a movie, that kind of editing process. And, if you were doing this as a film soundtrack, back then it was a little clunky, but they had nonlinear editing, and that's, if you know the process of how they would mix and put a soundtrack together for a film. Popular music technology was actually a bit more primitive. And that's why we're saying it would have been almost impossible for him to have edited this together with, 1/4-inch tape and a razor blade. And you can even hear on a couple of the songs, I mean, there's a clunky edit kind of a clunky edit in the middle of Heroes and Villains. And the sad part is that after, he only had the 1 8-track master, he would have one set of lead vocals on it, mix it down, use that for the edit, but then he would go back to the 8-track, wipe off the vocals, and put another set on. So we finally got a hold of the original Smiley Smile mono master reel, and the number of splices.
Wow.
Particularly in a song like Heroes and Villains, it was just, I think they started coming apart as we were listening to it, as I recall.
The more they were sticky than coming apart. Coming apart would have been better. But.
And it was so fragile that when on the Smiley Smile album, the whole album, and Wild Honey to a certain extent too, there were so many splices and fades that couldn't be on there because there was just these modular blocks that they had to go down a generation for the mono master, add, EQ it, make sure everything matched up, add the fades. And that's actually one of the reasons why those two albums sounded a little muffled, because even the masters were a couple generations down, because there were so many bits and pieces that had to be put together.
I was listening to both of you mention the fact that Brian was just so far ahead of his time, ahead of the technology. And around that same sort of time, I think that they brought in the Wrecking Crew to do a lot of the session works, the instrumentation for the records. There was one quote, I think Brian was talking about Carol Kay and saying she's the best bassist ever. And he's a bass player and he's giving her all the props. And she goes, it's amazing. He comes in and everything is charted out. All my bass lines. It's just amazing, and he did that for every instrument. I mean, that just blows me away.
Yeah, it's interesting because Brian very early on had ambitions to be a producer, kind of like a Phil Spector type. And he was working with outside artists. And from the very beginning, he was using the Wrecking Crew on those sessions, not the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys were pretty much self-contained, and he'd bring in, a member or two to sort of augment things. And maybe on a couple of the big production singles, Why Do Fools Fall in Love and, Fun, he'd have more of the Wrecking Crew on there. But he knew their capabilities long before he started working with them so deeply on the Beach Boys stuff. And I think they were so adept, they could play anything, you could whistle them apart and they could integrate it. And it just opened up the floodgates on his imagination, because, if he could hear it in his head, they could put it on tape.
Mm.
Well, and they could contribute too. I mean, if you listen to the session for God Only Knows, the staccato bridge, that's Don Randy's suggestion. Brian was so adept at when he heard something, whether it was his idea or somebody else's, when he heard it and he knew it was right, okay, put it in. The thing that has always impressed me when I listen to those sessions is that maybe one that I can think of where the final take isn't the one he decided on the spot was it. I mean, God Only Knows the session started at 11 at night, so it must have run till 2 or 3 in the morning. And there isn't the little break before the vamp. That's a edit that they did on the spot. But when they left it, when he gets to the end, you hear it. It's like, we got it. Thank you. Good night. You want to hear it? Come in. Because that's the other thing that people don't really quite understand is, unlike today when everybody's wearing headphones and probably has their own little mixer to hear what they want to hear when they're cutting, and they can hear echo. And nobody heard any of that when they were recording these songs. I mean, it's a testament to, not all the musicians. I mean, the Wrecking Crew and the Beach Boys as well, who played, on so many of their records, almost everything until around 65. That nobody wore headphones, and nobody heard, what the balance was, what the reverb was adding, what the delays were adding, unless they heard it in the control room. For example, when Brian quite often had a guitar player or two in the control room directly plugged into the console, nobody in the studio heard what they were playing. Only those. I mean, those guys heard the whole thing, which is great for them, but nobody else heard that. So, and that was quite a revelation to me, somebody who has been making records, since the mid 70s. It's almost like a different world, the way records were made, starting when 8-track and 16-track came along, as opposed to those days where it was much, much more capturing a live performance and conducting, if you will, how everybody played. I mean, it's interesting to hear these sessions and you hear, yeah, they're doing fun. I think it is. And Chuck Britz is engineering and tells Brian to play the piano as hard as he can, so the sound will be picked up correctly. Obviously, not with a mic stuffed to the piano. I mean, it's the sound of a piano from over there, but he needs to play it really loud or you won't hear it at all. So it's things like that, as opposed to what starts happening with lots and lots of tracks is everything's got a mic stuck in it. And you're creating the balance, somewhere else. The revelation alone that in my world, or the recording world, starting in the 70s or the late 60s, you start with the drum sound, and if you have a bunch of musicians, you build it from there. Those days, you did it just the opposite. You built everything else, and then you added whatever amount of the drum mics you needed to fill that in. If you'd done it the other way, it wouldn't work at all, because it was all based on the leakage from the drums, getting into the bass mic, and that's the way the rooms were designed. I mean,
and you got to keep in mind too that on a lot of the Pet Sounds and all the Beach Boys stuff, they're working in a rather small room. West Wing Studio 3 is pretty small, and particularly on something like God Only Knows. I mean, Bruce Johnson loves to talk about that session. There were so many people in the room.
It's about 14 people, yeah.
And you get this amazing blend. And, obviously a big part of the sound is the way instruments from one track are leaking into, other tracks throughout it. And Brian calls it swim. He calls it, you get this thing where you're just everything sort of swims, especially the way he would sometimes have multiple instruments playing the same part. So you get like a completely different sound. So
you see it, yeah. You can see it in Love and Mercy, which we filmed in Studio 3 with real musicians. And I lobbied for a little bit the idea that we would actually, mic it all up and record it in one of the other rooms. And for just time and production and money, we couldn't do that. But to stand in, the only time I've ever stood in that room with that many musicians and heard what it sounded like. And then you can hear it because the audio for those music sections is a production mic in the room capturing it. And you really can, you can hear and understand, how that worked, as opposed to, what started to happen. Like I said, when 8-track and 16-track came along and suddenly we want to isolate everything. We don't want leakage. That's we want everything to be isolated so we can change the balance or in fact replace an instrument if we decide to. And I think to some degree, I mean, even though there's still were and are great musicians, I think it's to some degree fostered a bit of laziness, and it also removes some of the fortuitous things that used to happen in recording sessions. I mean, the bicycle bell And the little horn on You Still Believe in Me is only there because it was originally conceived of as a song called My Childhood. So it had, that Brian put in, had that put in there. And then when it became You Still Believe in Me, we're going to recut the track, and you usually couldn't remove the bell and the horn. So they stayed. And would it have been better or worse without them? I don't know. Nowadays, of course, they would have been overdubs, or you would have recut the whole thing just because. I've always felt that the recordings made, and not just by the Beach Boys, but by everybody in that era, it really is a whole different world. I mean, not even akin to black and white versus color in film. It's just, the way the records were made, and why for the most part you used outside musicians. The Beach Boys were actually fairly unique in that they did play on most of their records, and they were really good too, up until a certain point. Typical of that period was no, we've got to replace all, most or all of the musicians in the band with session guys, whether it was in LA or New York or wherever, because in practical terms, it just made more sense. I mean, mostly you wanted to get 2 or 3 or 4 backing tracks. I've heard the 4-track session for Mr. Tambourine Man, which is cut in LA, and the only member of the Byrds that's playing on it is Roger McGuinn. Everybody else, it's Hal Blaine and Larry Metcalf and Leon Russell. And they get it in about 17 takes, and they also cut the B-side. And the story is that Turn, 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 the next single, the Byrds played on, and it took 84 takes to get an acceptable backing track. So, I mean, people always tend to assume that all those records are the Wrecking Crew, because yes, they are pretty much more or less exclusively from the latter half of Today and almost all of Summer Days. Obviously, all of Pet Sounds. That must apply to every other important record they cut, and it's not true.
An interesting thing about the whole, the Beach Boys' own evolution was Brian obviously excelled at that sort of intense process in the moment, with all the pieces in there, making decisions on the spot while you're going on. As the technology starts to increase and the number of tracks start to increase and the whole process changes, he doesn't seem as interested in the follow through, and the sort of long, laborious process of perhaps layering things. And that's where his brother Carl suddenly comes in. And Carl was in some ways the opposite of Brian. He could be very methodical. He would take his time. He would think about it. But he was also really good at sort of coordinating and getting all the, herding the cats as necessary, to get to pull the pieces together. And when you start getting up to things like, particularly, it really starts on 2020 and Sunflower. This is where you have a lot of cases where Brian is coming up with amazing material on this, burst of inspiration, and getting a backing track down, and then he's off, doing something else. And Carl is the one who coordinates and basically puts the pieces together and does the, produces the mixes, working with someone like Steve Vesper. And Carl seemed to really thrive when there were a lot of choices to be made later on in the process. And I just think it's sort of an interesting dynamic, watching the shift from Brian to Carl as the technology changes. And I think Carl has not gotten his due as a producer, particularly on albums like Sunflower and Surf's Up and Holland and so forth. And one of the things that we really wanted to do with this expanded box set was kind of show the diversity of the group's later catalog. One thing I've always said is that the Beach Boys did so many kinds of music so well that they developed multiple divergent and at times incompatible fan bases. Because you go from these incredibly exuberant, beach party fun tracks to, Holland and Sunflower and Surf's Up and this really deep, it's sometimes very dark, very complex, kind of progressive stuff. And then on the other hand, you've got something like The Beach Boys' Love You, which is one of my favorite records of all time. No album before or after has ever sounded like that. And so one of the things we really wanted to do with this expanded collection was, try to put a spotlight on all of these different, kind of facets and personalities within the band. Let's hear some of Dennis's material. We even got a couple of songs that were unreleased originally that we found in the vaults, and California Feeling and Dennis's Wouldn't It Be Nice to Live Again, that I think are just as good as a lot of things that the group has done. So it's not just the first and second tier album favorites and favorite B-sides. We're really trying to kind of get people to sort of look at them a little differently. Like, I had no idea the Beach Boys would do this kind of music.
Well, it looks like it's all going to be in this amazing set, which comes out, I believe, June 17th, right? That's 6 vinyl LPs and then 3 CDs. Right. Expanded edition, 80 newly remastered, numbered lithographs, 4 of them exclusive. Basically a year-long celebration of this, the 60th anniversary. It seems like it should be more than 60 years somehow. It's like it doesn't seem like old enough.
Longer.
Well, the last 3 years it felt like 62. I mean, that's
somehow recently they're realizing that I've been working on with this stuff for 35 years, which is half my life. Somehow all of a sudden it seems like a lot of years, where it didn't feel that way 10 years ago. It was only 25 years.
What was the time that you remember when you heard something from the Beach Boys that just knocked you out, gave you those goosebumps, gave you those chills? I mean, is it constant, steady, or what was that time that you go, oh my God, this is just brilliant?
I had multiple over the years. I mean,
well, sure, yeah.
I'll confess I was a Beach Boy fanatic at the age of 5. And I still remember hearing Pet Sounds as a kid, and it helped me through. I went through some trauma when I was a little kid, and there was something very healing about Brian's music, and it's something I've actually had some long talks with him about. But I still remember, hearing "Don't Talk" for the first time, and some of the songs off of that album. When Sunflower came out, I was the kid who got it the week it came out, and that just. This Whole World and Cool Water just blew me away. But even now, like the first time we heard Dennis's Wouldn't It Be Nice to Live Again, which we pulled when we were working on a Surf's Up project about 20 years ago, we'd never heard that track before. And it was just unbelievable. The quality of the yearning quality of his vocals.
The subject matter. I mean, it's haunting.
But it comes up. But yeah, that happens all the time. There are passages in the backing track of Wouldn't It Be Nice that sometimes I'll just go back and listen to over and over and over and over and over and over again. There's stuff in the Beach Boys' Love You that, as I've uncovered, the chord changes that just really hit some musical nerves. There's a way the voices go together on some of the Surf's Up tracks. That just kind of still give me chills. I mean,
it's always the best. Yeah, so many times it's the backgrounds. I mean, one of my favorite things that we've created for the Pet Sounds box was Wouldn't It Be Nice without the lead vocal, just the backgrounds. And if you listen to the record, you would think that the backgrounds are pretty straightforward. But when you hear them without the interweave of the lead, you realize just how complicated and amazing an arrangement it is. I'll just say for me personally, I mean, I 2 things. I'm 10 years younger than Brian. So I was 10 years old in 1962 when their record started coming out. And I remember somewhere around there, 10 or 11, I had a best friend and going to his house for a sleepover. And he had an older sister who had all these 45s, and had one of those 45 record changers, where you stacked them up and they okay. I don't remember what else we listened to, but I vividly remember, those red and orange, yellow and orange Capital Swirl 45s, and listening to those. And then of course I started buying them. I still have those. I've sold off a lot of my record collection, but I still have those. then flash forward, what would it be? 25 years, 1987. And I don't know why we did this, but for some reason, when we worked on Brian's solo record, maybe to inspire him, I don't know. They decided to bring in the 8-track master for half of Pet Sounds. We got a machine, and I get a special machine to play it. So we're sitting in the studio, and I get to hear, I get to dissect, the multi-track of this record that I've been listening to, for 20 odd years. That was just, an amazing moment for me, both as a listener and as an engineer. I mean, because
and
always
listening with Brian.
Yeah.
Oh.
Wow.
I don't remember that Brian, was particularly cared, Brian, frankly, has always been somebody who, seems to me to do his work, do his creative work. And then that's done. I'm moving on, to the next thing. He's not someone, and there are a lot of artists like this, including people in his band, in his original band, that, and understandably, want to go back and, change the color of the sky in the painting, and while I've always said that obviously an artist has the absolute right to do that, to erase it or, whatever. Usually their instincts at the beginning, are correct and the best. But Brian always seemed both very adept at knowing when it was complete, and as we say, to solder it, and also, except for Smile, which clearly was something that haunted him from the time he abandoned it to the time that he finished it. And I think that, as an aside, that regardless of what it gave to the world, that what completing that did for him was monumental, because I didn't imagine that he could have been still hung up about that after all that time. And clearly he was very scared to approach it and do it. But when it was done, it made a tremendous, it was obvious. I mean, it was just really weird, actually. When we finished it and, gave him, essentially test CDs, and I said, Brian, that's it. You finished Smile. And it really seemed like an albatross cut off his back. And I guess that, that is the sign of a great artist, that, if you do something, or you're trying for something that monumental, that you can't just put it aside and give it up completely.
Especially the fact that people liked it. He was really, of all those years, he was afraid that it wasn't any good. But when standing ovations at the at the Royal Hall in London and so forth.
Oh, well, that was quite a moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just like he suddenly realized that he wasn't crazy, he wasn't wrong. There was value to it all along. So that was
that's nice.
Brian Pleasant, he really is sensitive to what people think of his work. So
either your opinion or maybe there's the answer from the record company. Is there a deadline for this music? I mean, are they saying, you know what? If we don't finish everything by 2035, we're not going to be able to sell it anymore. Our audience is going to die off. Is there any perspective of that?
No, nothing. I mean, it changes profoundly. I mean, the number of changes I've seen in the 35 years of the label, when we started doing these things, this was all artistic gravy, if you will. I mean, nobody looked at these projects in terms of what they cost or whether they were going to make money. It was a way to celebrate the music and the artistry of, Brian and the Beach Boys. Now that changed, especially with the enormous success of Sounds of Summer. In fact, the irony was that it was so successful that it's taken 30 years before we've essentially, we're doing a volume 2. At the time, we assumed we would do a volume 2 because the record industry generally, if something works, especially a hits package, you immediately try to get something as close to it as possible that'll appeal to the same audience. Well, by 2003, that wasn't the attitude anymore. The attitude was, this thing is still selling like hotcakes. What do we want a volume 2 for? But to answer your question, no, I'm sure we'll be doing these as long as there's music to do, and of course it will undoubtedly get recycled again. We're now doing, we haven't touched on this, but we're doing, I did the first disc in Atmos, which is the new surround format that the labels are promoting, and I think this one may actually survive as opposed to 5.1 and DVD audio and all that.
There's also a legal thing that happened with copyright protection in Europe.
Oh, yes, that's
about 10 years ago, which from a corporate point of view, when you're able to go to corporate and say, look, we got to put these tracks out or else by a certain date, or else they fall into the public domain.
Mm-hmm.
And that has kind of really helped us with these archival box sets, so from 2000, that law went into effect in 2013. And so every year we've had Beach Boy releases,
even when they haven't been, physical.
And of course, Mark and I will take every opportunity we can to expand it and bring in session stuff and goodies and alternate mixes so you can hear the backing tracks. And we've always gotten a great response. There's a couple of them I really wish had been sold as physical product. There were ones for the Friends.
The Friends in 2020. Yeah, really wish those could be physical.
There's a 64 package out there called Keep an Eye on Summer, which is just the most fun because you really get to hear the Beach Boys just having a great old time in the studio and Brian working on all these tracks. But it's really helped us out a lot, having that as the primary reason to do something in the first place. And we just did the Field Flows project last year that we're really proud of, and copyright protection was part of it. But, thankfully the label gave us this platform to really pick apart one of the richest eras in the group's catalog. And it sold far better than expectations to the point where all of us who worked on the thing couldn't even get vinyl copies of it.
That's, and they couldn't have found two people that know about the legacy and how important that is. And we're all just so fortunate that you two were involved in this and continue to be. And we thank you so much for your time. You've been really fascinating. Really appreciate it, Alan Boyd and Mark Linett.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of your day.
Really enjoyed talking with both Mark Linett and Alan Boyd. We appreciate their time for this great interview.
Also, thank you to our good friend Elliot Kendall of Film and Music PR and Promotion for coordinating the interview.
You can pick up the new remastered vinyl box set and CD 3-pack by ordering from your local music store or the other guys.
Yeah, the other guys. Try to get it where you can. Help out the little guy if you can.
That's right.
It was great. Right. Boy, hearing what little music we did here, unfortunately, the record company was keeping this very under wraps and not much has been released at all. So we didn't hear a lot. But boy, the difference in sound sounded incredible. So.
Really wish we could have heard more of the material, but we will as soon as the product comes out. When Elliot pitched us this idea, he was describing it like Giles Martin, son of George Martin, who produced all the Beatles stuff, that did the recent Get Back stuff with Peter Jackson for Get Back, that special. And, for some of the other stuff that was in the Love Tribute shows in Las Vegas.
That was cool.
Great stuff.
It was great mixes, great new kind of different twists on those Beatles. Yeah. Like you said, it's a great, difference and twist and such a wide range of the Beach Boys music for the box set. So check it out where you can. Also check out our show notes on our website. That's rockandrollconfessional.rocks. And there you can find links to order the vinyl or the CD sets, along with some really cool, interesting Beach Boys videos that we've posted up there. Make sure you support the podcast by subscribing wherever you can, wherever you listen. Please just hit the subscribe button so it automatically, the new episodes come to you as soon as they're posted. And write a review for us. We appreciate that. take you a couple minutes and follow us and comment whatever you can on Instagram and Facebook. Share our posts with your friends. We appreciate anything you can do to help get our name out there in the big, beautiful music world.
Excellent.
Right?
Well,
Right?
excellent. And Beach Boys music is just perfect for summertime, which we're just almost officially in.
Right?
So
just
it's
there,
it's
right
all
in the
good.
corner, kids.
It's all good.
So keep
All right.
those cards and letters coming. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.